Rhea was no stranger to the worn-out, abandoned places of the world. As a mechanic, she had spent countless hours fixing old machines, breathing life back into the forgotten. But when she stumbled across an old mountain fortress tucked away deep in the hills, she never expected what lay hidden inside. What began as a routine inspection of an overgrown property quickly escalated into a jaw-dropping discovery. A fleet of army tanks, abandoned yet pristine, sitting like forgotten giants, each one worth millions. But the tanks weren't the only secret the fortress held. Before we dive into this heart-pounding journey, tell us where you're tuning in from. If stories of hidden treasures, mystery, and adrenaline-pumping discoveries excite you, make sure to hit that subscribe button because the twists coming up will leave you speechless. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the mountain ridge as Rhea navigated the rough, winding road. Her old Jeep rattled against the bumps and rocks, the tires skidding slightly on the loose gravel. She had grown used to the isolation of these back roads, often taking jobs in places others would shy away from. A mechanic by trade, Kate had a knack for finding the forgotten things, the rusted, the broken, the abandoned. It was in these places that she felt most at home. Today, however, the job was different. A client had called her about an old military facility deep in the mountains, one that had been abandoned for decades. The fortress had once served a purpose: training, testing, or maybe something more covert. But now it sat unused, collecting dust and memories of a time long past. The client had offered her a generous fee to inspect the site, to make sure the structure was still safe, and assess whether anything of value was left behind. Kate was used to inspecting old machinery, but something about this job felt off. The invitation had been too sudden, too mysterious. As the Jeep bumped over the final stretch of road, she squinted through the windshield, her eyes catching a glimpse of the fortress in the distance. Nestled against the steep mountainside, its walls were crumbling, overtaken by nature. Yet there was something imposing about it, like a giant waiting to wake up. She pulled up to the entrance and parked, stepping out with a sense of anticipation. The air was thick with dust, and the silence felt oppressive, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Kate's boots crunched against the gravel as she made her way to the large steel doors that led into the heart of the fortress. The heavy, rusted doors seemed to mock her, standing so solid, yet so forgotten. "Let's see what you're hiding," she muttered under her breath, her hands already reaching for her tools. The doors creaked open with a groan, revealing a cavernous space beyond. As her flashlight cut through the darkness, the dim light revealed row upon row of military equipment, old, some covered in dust and cobwebs, but others still bearing the gleam of recent use. It didn't make sense. This place was abandoned. Why was there still so much equipment inside? As Kate moved deeper into the shadows, something caught her eye. A series of large, hulking shapes sat against the far wall, almost hidden from view. She stepped closer, her heart beginning to race. The outlines of the machines were unmistakable. Tanks, several of them, their turrets pointed in various directions, as if they were waiting for orders that had never come. Kate froze for a moment, taking it all in. There they were, armored vehicles that could change the course of any military operation, worth millions if they were intact, and clearly left behind in a hurry. But what had brought them here? And why had no one come back for them? Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out to touch the cold, metal surface of the nearest tank. The air felt heavier now, and she could hear the faint sound of her breath echoing in the stillness. She wasn't just in a forgotten fortress anymore. She was standing on the edge of something bigger, a mystery that stretched far beyond her understanding. "Who left you here?" she whispered to the machines, the question hanging in the air, unanswered. The silence swallowed her words. Kate's heart pounded in her chest as she slowly circled the tanks. They were massive, far larger than any vehicle she had ever worked on before. The steel was thick, nearly impervious to the passing of time, and the camouflage paint was still surprisingly intact despite years of neglect. The sheer weight of their presence was overwhelming. These weren't just relics. They were pieces of history, sitting idle in the dark, waiting to be discovered. Her flashlight flickered slightly as she scanned the room, illuminating more tanks, some still parked in neat rows, Others scattered haphazardly, as if they had been abandoned in a rush. They were meticulously arranged, a little too perfectly, considering the conditions of the rest of the fortress. The metal walls around her seemed to hum with an eerie stillness, as if the very building was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Kate crouched beside the nearest tank, her fingers brushing over the cold surface of the turret. It was then that she noticed something beneath the layers of dust and grime. A small, faded emblem had been etched into the side. She squinted, leaning in closer. The symbol was barely visible, worn by time, but it looked military, something she didn't recognize immediately. Her curiosity piqued. She carefully traced the outline of the emblem with her fingers. It seemed familiar, yet different. She made a mental note to look into it later, but for now, she had more pressing matters to deal with. Kate stood up and walked around the tanks, her eyes scanning every inch. Behind one of the machines, partially hidden in the shadows, she spotted something else, an open hatch. The gleam of a metal staircase leading down caught her attention, and she felt a sudden, overwhelming pull to investigate further. She hadn't expected this. A hidden passageway beneath a mountain fortress? This was more than just an old military base, it was a secret, and it was waiting to be uncovered. Kate took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to leave this place untouched, but her curiosity pushed her forward. She knew there was more to these tanks, more to the fortress. And something told her that whatever secrets were buried beneath this floor would change everything. With a quick glance at the tanks once more, Kate descended the stairs, her flashlight illuminating the path ahead. The air grew cooler as she moved deeper into the structure, and the quiet was suffocating. The dim glow of her light barely reached the end of the passage, but as she moved forward, she saw a flicker of light ahead, something electronic, still powered after all these years. As she approached, the walls narrowed, and the sound of her boots echoing off the stone floor was the only thing she could hear. Her heartbeat quickened, each step taking her deeper into the unknown. At the end of the corridor, Kate stopped. Before her, nestled in the dim light, was a massive steel door, unlike any she had seen before. It was reinforced, with heavy-duty locks that seemed to have been tampered with recently. Something about it felt out of place in the midst of all the decay. Kate approached the door slowly, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know what lay behind it, but she was certain that this door held the answers she had been seeking. The tanks weren't the only things hiding secrets. Something much bigger was waiting for her. With a quick glance over her shoulder, Kate knew she was crossing a line she might not be able to return from. But she couldn't stop now. She wasn't just a mechanic. She was a seeker, and the truth, whatever it was just on the other side of that door. The door before Kate loomed like an impenetrable wall, its heavy locks rusted, but still formidable. She could feel the years of neglect and secrecy weighing down on her, but her determination burned brighter than ever. This wasn't just about uncovering hidden tanks anymore. There was something more, something deeper, buried beneath decades of silence. Kate pulled out her toolkit and crouched in front of the door. Her hands worked with a familiarity that came from years of dealing with rusted machinery and malfunctioning locks. As she twisted the old rusted key into place, she felt a satisfying click, followed by the groan of ancient hinges giving way. The door opened with a deep, echoing sound that reverberated through the stone passage, and Kate braced herself. The room beyond was darker than the rest of the fortress, and the air was thick with dust, clinging to the walls like cobwebs. But there was something else. A faint hum, a pulse of energy that seemed to vibrate beneath the ground, filling the space with an eerie presence. Kate's flashlight swept across the room, revealing rows of computers and heavy-duty equipment far more sophisticated than anything she had expected to find in a decaying military base. The hum of electricity was stronger now, and she could see the faint glow of monitors, their screens flickering with static. The lights were on, and yet the place had been abandoned for decades. The strange contradiction sent a shiver down her spine. As Kate moved deeper into the room, she spotted a large, dusty table at the far end. Maps, blueprints, and other documents were scattered across the surface. She approached cautiously, brushing the dust off the papers. The maps were old, their edges yellowed and curled, but the markings were still clear. There were coordinates, a series of locations, some marked with large, bold red X's. Kate's mind raced as she realized that the tanks were just part of a much larger operation. These weren't just any military vehicles. These were connected to something more, something secret. As she picked up one of the blueprints, her eyes widened. It wasn't just a blueprint for a tank. It was for an entire series of operations plans for a covert military mission, codenamed Operation Eclipse. The documents described highly classified technology, weapon systems, and location sites that were known only to a handful of people. This wasn't just a forgotten military base. This was the heart of a secret operation that had been buried for decades. Kate's fingers trembled as she turned the pages, her mind trying to absorb the magnitude of what she was holding. Each document seemed to reveal a part of a puzzle, and she could feel the pieces falling into place. But the more she learned, the more questions arose. Why had these tanks been abandoned here? Why had the operation been shut down? And who else knew about this place? As she skimmed through more papers, one name stood out: General R. Albrecht. The name was mentioned repeatedly, linked to various classified projects and military units. A chill ran down her spine. She didn't recognize the name, but she knew it was significant. And the deeper she delved, the more she realized that General Albrecht was no ordinary officer. He was at the center of it all. Kate knew she couldn't just walk away from this. The information she had uncovered wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. And there were people out there who would do anything to get their hands on it. As she gathered the papers, she heard the sound of boots on stone. Her heart skipped a beat as she quickly stuffed the documents into her bag. She wasn't alone. Someone else had found this place. Someone who wasn't about to let her leave with what she knew. Kate's pulse quickened as the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Her instincts kicked in. The room she was in, once an isolated cavern of secrets, suddenly felt far too small, the walls pressing in around her. She glanced toward the door, but the figure in the shadows was already there, blocking her only exit. Her heart raced. There was no time to waste. Without thinking, Kate grabbed the bag with the precious documents and darted for a side door at the back of the room. It was a narrow passage, leading deeper into the fortress. The dim light from her flashlight flickered as she sprinted, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't know who was following her or what they wanted, but she could feel the urgency in the air, the kind that came just before the storm. The footsteps behind her quickened, and Kate knew she couldn't outrun them forever. She pushed forward, hoping the passageway would offer her some escape, but it seemed to stretch on endlessly. Her mind raced through every possible way to get out. The tanks, the hidden stairway. She'd have to circle back, but that was a gamble. She had no idea how many others might be lurking in the shadows of this fortress. She reached a dead end. Her flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows along the stone walls. Panic clawed at her chest as she spun around, hoping to find another route. But the footsteps had stopped. "Stop!" a voice called from the darkness. It was gruff, low, with a harshness that sent a cold shiver down her spine. "I know you're there." Kate stood motionless, her eyes darting from side to side, searching for anything she could use. The heavy bag slung over her shoulder felt like a weight she couldn't afford. She glanced toward the wall, noticing a ventilation grate high above her. It might be too small to fit, but it was her only chance. Without hesitation, she ran at the wall, jumping up to grasp the edges of the grate. Her muscles strained as she pulled herself up, her fingertips just barely catching the metal. She could hear the man's footsteps echoing behind her, but she had no choice. She kicked her legs, gritting her teeth as she hoisted herself up into the dark space beyond. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she crawled through the tight vent, the cool metal scraping against her arms. She could hear the man calling out from below, his voice muffled, but growing angrier. He was close. Too close. For a moment, everything felt still. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, drowning out the sound of the man's pursuit. She focused only on the path ahead, hoping to reach a point where she could find her bearings. The vents twisted and turned, winding through the fortress like a hidden artery. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kate found a small grate that opened to the outside. She could see the light of the mountain sky beyond, just waiting for her to escape. Without thinking, she kicked the grate open and crawled out into the fresh air, gasping for breath. She could hear the distant clatter of boots inside the fortress as she pulled herself free. She stood up, her heart hammering, and took a moment to steady herself. The cool mountain breeze helped calm her racing thoughts, but it also made her realize just how much danger she was in. The documents she carried were more than just military secrets. They were a key to something far bigger. And now, she was certain someone was willing to kill to get their hands on them. As Kate glanced back at the fortress, the sun began to dip below the mountain range, casting long shadows over the structure. She wasn't sure if she had truly escaped, but one thing was clear. She was no longer just a mechanic. She had stumbled into a war, one that had been hidden for years, and now, she was part of it. The fortress held secrets. Dark, dangerous secrets. And Kate had just begun to uncover them. Kate didn't stop running until the fortress was far behind her, its silhouette fading into the growing dusk. Her legs ached, her lungs burned with every breath, but her mind raced faster than her body ever could. The cool mountain air did little to ease the sense of dread that had taken root in her chest. She had barely escaped, and now, with the stolen documents weighing heavily on her shoulders, Kate couldn't help but feel the weight of what she'd just uncovered. She ducked into a nearby thicket, hidden from the road that wound down the mountain. Her fingers fumbled with the zipper of her bag, pulling out the papers she'd managed to steal from the underground room. Her flashlight's weak glow illuminated the documents, their importance now more undeniable than ever. The maps, blueprints, and classified information all pointed to one undeniable fact. Operation Eclipse was no mere operation. It was a deep, dark network, stretching across continents, involving military-grade technology, hidden weapons, caches, and names that no one was supposed to know. Kate spread the papers out on the ground, her fingers trembling as she scanned each one. The coordinates marked on the maps stood out locations that weren't just military bases, but zones of active operations, each more classified than the last. As she pored over the information, a sense of urgency settled over her. This wasn't a story of hidden tanks anymore. It was something much larger, something that could potentially shake the very foundation of global security. She shoved the papers back into her bag with a frustrated sigh. What she didn't know, though, was that she wasn't alone. As the night grew darker, Kate realized that the silence of the mountain wasn't the peaceful kind. The air had shifted, charged with an undercurrent of danger. She heard a faint rustle in the bushes to her right, followed by the unmistakable sound of a vehicle, a truck's engine in the distance, its headlights cutting through the trees as it crept closer. Her pulse quickened. The shadows were closing in, and this time, they weren't just a vague presence in the background. Someone was coming for her. Kate slid to her feet, moving quickly but carefully, her eyes darting between the trees, looking for any sign of movement. The truck's engine was growing louder now, the faint rumble echoing in her chest. She couldn't afford to be seen. She couldn't afford to make a sound. With a final glance toward the road, Kate turned and sprinted into the dense underbrush, ducking low beneath the thick canopy of trees. Her mind raced. She had no plan. No clear idea of who was after her or what they wanted. All she knew was that the fortress had been hiding more than she'd ever expected, and the danger it had unleashed was far from over. The truck rumbled to a stop a few hundred feet from her, its headlights casting long shadows over the trail Kate had just left. The sound of doors opening echoed through the forest, and she could hear the low murmur of voices. The figures moved quickly, their steps purposeful. She had to act fast. Kate pushed herself harder, running blind through the dark, hoping the cover of night would work in her favor. Her mind raced to the one thing that might save her the tanks. If she could get back to the fortress, she might be able to use one of them to get away, to put distance between herself and whoever was after her. But would she make it in time? The truck's headlights flickered as the figures seemed to fan out in search of her, their voices growing more frantic with each passing second. Kate's breath came in ragged bursts as she ran, weaving between trees, jumping over rocks, her boots sinking into the soft earth beneath her. She had no choice. The documents in her bag were too important to just let go, and now she was too deep into this twisted game to back out. Behind her, the truck's engine revved, and the pursuit had begun. Kate's lungs burned as she pushed herself through the dense forest. The sound of the truck's engine was growing closer, the headlights cutting through the trees behind her. She knew she couldn't outrun them much longer. The terrain was uneven, the branches catching at her clothes, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Ahead, she spotted a small cabin nestled between the trees. It was barely visible in the dark, but the faint glow from a single window caught her eye. She didn't think twice. It was her only chance to hide. As she approached the door, she froze. The sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel behind her made her heart race. She was seconds from being caught. With no time to lose, she pushed the door open. The man standing in the doorway seemed just as surprised to see her as she was to find him. His weathered face looked familiar, but Kate couldn't place him. "You're running from them too?" he asked, his voice rough from years of disuse. Kate didn't answer immediately. She scanned the dark woods around them. "They're after me," she said, her voice tight with urgency. The man nodded without hesitation, stepping aside to let her in. He quickly closed the door behind her, locking it with a swift motion. Inside, the cabin was small, almost too quiet. There was a wood stove in the corner, a small table, and a couple of chairs. The man motioned to one of the chairs. "Sit," he said, his tone softening. "They won't find you here." Kate sank into the chair, trying to steady her breathing. The man moved to the small kitchen area, pulling down a can of beans from the shelf. He didn't speak for a moment, and Kate couldn't help but wonder who he was and what he knew about the people chasing her. "You know about the fortress?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man set the can down and looked at her. "I know more than I care to." Kate stared at the man, her mind racing with questions. The way he spoke about the fortress made it clear that he wasn't just some random stranger. He knew things she needed to understand. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. The man, Jack, sighed and leaned against the wall. "You're in over your head. I've been tracking the place for years. I knew something big was buried in there, but I never expected to find you." Kate's brow furrowed. "What's in the fortress?" "More than just tanks," Jack replied, his eyes narrowing. "Those tanks are part of an operation that's been kept under wraps for decades. The people who left them there, they didn't just walk away. This place is tied to military secrets so dangerous, so classified. They'll stop at nothing to protect it." Kate's stomach twisted. She had stumbled onto something much bigger than she realized. The more she thought about it, the more everything started to connect: the tanks, the strange blueprints, the papers she had taken. "Who are they?" Kate asked, her voice a whisper. Jack's eyes darkened. "The ones who don't want this secret getting out. They're connected to people in power, military, government people who are willing to kill to keep it buried." Kate felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had no idea what she was up against. "So, what now?" she asked. Jack pushed off from the wall. "We make sure you're not the one who gets buried." Kate's breath came in ragged bursts as she sprinted through the dense woods, following Jack's lead. The truck's engine rumbled behind them, its sound growing louder as the men chasing her narrowed the distance. She couldn't hear their voices yet, but she knew they were getting closer. Her heart raced with each step, a constant thump in her chest, as if urging her to go faster. The weight of the bag slung over her shoulder seemed heavier with every stride, but she didn't dare stop to check the contents. The documents, maps, blueprints, military secrets were the most valuable thing in her possession now. They weren't just papers. They were the key to an operation far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Jack didn't break his pace, moving swiftly through the forest with the kind of familiarity that suggested he had been here many times before. His eyes scanned the surroundings, ever vigilant, always listening for the slightest sound. Kate tried to keep up, but the exhaustion from the earlier run was starting to take its toll. Her legs felt like lead, and the adrenaline, though it had pushed her this far, was beginning to wear thin. "Keep up," Jack called over his shoulder, his voice urgent but calm. "We need to get to the fortress before they do." The fortress. The place where everything had started. Kate didn't want to go back there. She had barely escaped the first time. But now, it seemed like her only option. She trusted Jack, but there was no telling what they would find waiting for them at the fortress. "How far?" Kate gasped, trying to keep up as best as she could. "Not far," Jack replied, his voice low and steady. "We've got to move quickly." As they neared the edge of the forest, the sound of the truck's engine grew louder. Kate glanced over her shoulder, seeing the headlights cutting through the trees like searching eyes. They were closing in, fast. "Come on, Kate, we've got to hurry," Jack urged. "If we don't make it to the tanks, we're finished." The tanks. Kate's mind raced with the memory of the massive, silent machines that held the key to getting out of this mess. They were more than just military relics. They were part of a secret operation, one that had been hidden away for decades. And now, they were the only hope for survival. With every step, the sense of urgency heightened. The sound of the truck's engine was nearly deafening now, and Kate's heart skipped a beat as she saw the outline of the fortress ahead. Jack was already pulling ahead, but Kate pushed herself harder, her body protesting but her mind focused on the task at hand. As they neared the fortress, Jack's pace quickened. "There they are," he shouted, pointing toward the line of tanks parked against the wall of the fortress. Kate looked ahead, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger, but the tanks were the only thing in sight. They had made it, but they were not out of the woods yet. "Get in now," Jack ordered as he rushed toward one of the tanks. Kate's heart skipped a beat as she sprinted toward the nearest vehicle, her feet pounding against the gravel. She could hear the truck closing in behind them. They didn't have much time. With Jack already climbing into the tank's turret, Kate quickly followed suit, pulling herself into the hatch and slamming it shut behind her. The world outside the tank seemed to vanish, the sound of the truck's engine muffled by the thick steel walls. But they weren't safe yet. Inside the tank, Kate's hands shook as she fumbled for the controls. Jack's voice came through the comms, a sharp reminder of what was at stake. "Start it up. We need to move now." Her fingers found the ignition button, and with a loud growl, the tank's engine roared to life. The rumbling shook the ground beneath them, and Kate's pulse quickened. They were ready. But the question was, were they fast enough? Kate's hands trembled as she gripped the controls of the tank. The engine roared beneath her, shaking the entire vehicle. She could feel the power of the machine coursing through her, but with that power came a heavy responsibility. Jack had trusted her to drive this thing, to get them out of the fortress, and now it was her turn to prove that she could. Behind them, the truck's headlights flickered as the pursuers adjusted their position. Kate could hear the faint rumble of their engine, but it was growing fainter. The tank's engine was loud, much louder than the truck, but it had a steady, relentless power. It was their only advantage now. "Can you drive this thing?" Jack's voice crackled through the comms, full of tension but with a hint of hope. "We don't have much time." "I can try," Kate replied, her voice shaky but determined. She wasn't sure if she had it in her, but she had no choice. She had to drive. She pressed the accelerator, and the tank lurched forward, its massive tracks crunching over gravel and dirt as they tore out of the fortress. The world outside was a blur as they barreled through the woods, pushing the tank to its limits. Behind them, the truck revved its engine, its tires screeching against the uneven ground as the men inside gave chase. They were relentless. But Kate didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Every second counted now. "You need to keep this thing moving, Kate," Jack shouted over the comms. "We've got to get out of here before they catch up." Kate's grip tightened on the controls as the tank thundered through the trees. The forest was thick, and the path was narrow, but the tank cut through it like a juggernaut, plowing down obstacles in its way. Kate glanced at the rearview screen and saw the truck behind them, gaining ground. But then, in the distance, she saw something an opening. The trees started to thin out, and ahead, she saw the road they had been looking for. It was just beyond the tree line, a straight shot to freedom. "We're almost there," Kate said, her voice tinged with relief. She pressed the accelerator harder, willing the tank to go faster. But the truck was closing in. She could hear it, the engine roaring in pursuit. They weren't out of the woods yet. Kate's mind raced. The road ahead was clear, but the men behind them wouldn't stop. Not now. They had to make it to the road, to freedom. But could they outrun them? Kate's hands shook as she gripped the controls, the tank moving faster now, its powerful engine roaring through the forest. The tree line ahead grew larger, and she knew they were almost there, almost to safety. But the truck wasn't giving up. It was gaining on them, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a predator chasing its prey. "Keep pushing!" Jack shouted, his voice sharp and urgent. "We need to make it to the road, Kate." Kate's chest tightened, her heart racing. They were so close, yet so far. The tank's massive wheels rumbled beneath her as she accelerated, pushing it to its limits. The forest was nearly behind them now, the wide-open road ahead. But the truck wasn't backing off. It was relentless, the roar of its engine a constant reminder of the danger they were in. Kate's eyes flicked to the rearview screen. She could see the truck's headlights, flashing dangerously close. "We're almost there," she shouted, the tank's roar drowning out the sound of her own voice. The trees began to thin, and the road appeared just beyond the clearing, the road to freedom. But the truck was still behind them, not far enough away to relax. Jack's hand gripped her shoulder. "Go, go, go," he urged. With one last push, Kate sent the tank charging forward, its massive tracks crushing the earth beneath them. The road was just ahead. They were almost there. And then, in a final burst of speed, the tank surged forward, bursting out of the woods and onto the open road. The truck screeched to a halt behind them, unable to match the tank's sheer force and speed. Kate took a deep breath, relief washing over her. They had made it. For now. But as the road stretched out ahead, Kate knew this was only the beginning. The secrets they had uncovered were far from over, and someone, somewhere, would stop at nothing to make sure they didn't escape.